At Simio, we're in the business of showing you the future. Our intelligent technology gives you unprecedented insight into complex systems to identify and solve today's inefficiencies and tomorrow's challenges. The Simio solution provides a low-risk opportunity to drive transformational change. Our true digital twin models capture all the constraints, business rules, and decision logic that define the operation of your system. When powered by your data, easily evaluate unlimited scenarios and deliver optimized solutions. No matter what industry you're in, eliminate your greatest operational process and scheduling challenges with a Simio digital twin. See your future success, Simio.
Well, once again, welcome everyone to our September 12th version here of our Simio Solution Series. Today's session is going to be From Data to Decisions, a guide to using Simio data connectors. My name, as always, is Dan Vasilini. I'm the VP of Global Sales over here at Simio. Doing most of the presenting today is going to be Adam Sneath. He is our Solution Engineering Team Lead. Our email addresses are shown there for contact purposes. I will bring this up again towards the end of the presentation in case you do want to reach out to us. But if you want to jot those down now, feel free. Also, you see the QR code there at the bottom of the screen. As we've been doing this year, I ask for any type of feedback you're willing to provide us. If you scan that QR code, you'll be taken to a short survey where it just asks you about what you see in our solution series, if there's anything you'd like to see in the future. So just asking for any type of feedback you'd like to provide us. Some housekeeping items before we get started here today. Today's session is being recorded for replay purposes. Please be aware of that. If you'd like to rewatch this session or suggest it to a friend or a colleague, it will be available on the new Simio webpage. If you go to simio.com, we have redone our webpage. You'll see a new webpage there. The link to get to our web sessions or our solution series is still similar in where you find it. It's under the Resources tab. And there is a Simio Solutions series under the Resource tab. You see a little picture right there of how you get to it, but it's right off the first page now versus being several pages deep to get to. Usually we have our webcast up in about 24 to 48 hours after finishing one of these. So if you miss today's session or you don't get to see all of it, you will be able to go back and see this probably within about 24 to 48 hours. Also, please be aware that all participants are on mute. So when you come in, you're automatically on mute. If you'd like to ask a question today, somewhere on your screen, you should see the GoToWebinar dashboard. In that GoToWebinar dashboard, there is a question box. I ask that you type your questions in there. Those questions come directly to me. And when those questions do come in for the presentation, I will either try to interrupt or step in when Adam takes a breather if it's a question relevant to something he's talking about, or if it's a more generic in nature question, I'll try to save those for the end. We do save time at the end of our presentation for Q&A, so we usually get to most or all questions asked. Today's session is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. Adam said he's got about 30 to 40 minutes worth of presentation, so definitely a lot of time left for questions either during the presentation or at the end. So like I said, if you do have questions, find that question box somewhere on your screen or find that GoToWebinar dashboard somewhere on your screen and get in the question box and you can ask your questions there. Two more web sessions set for this year. We have an October and a November session. We take the month of December off for holiday purposes and end of year wrap up for a lot of companies. So October 17th will be our next one. So about a month from now, that's gonna be on data tables, tips to implement them in models and experiments. And then we will be doing a November 13th session on, let's call it the best model configuration or optimization based upon how you want to look at things, but very interesting. 2 sessions left in the year. I would highly recommend that November 13th session. Not downplaying the 17th session, but the 13th session in November, we have a lot of questions that always come up about optimization and finding the best solution. So suggest getting there or getting registered for that session now. But as always, sessions are recorded. You can always go back and watch them in the future. one more slide, and then we'll jump into Adam. So just to thank everyone for attending today. When we do get into this, once again, the QR code's up there on the screen. We give you one last chance to scan it here. So if you didn't get a chance to scan it earlier, this is your chance once again to scan it. I will bring up our email addresses once again towards the end of the presentation, which will give you one last chance at the QR code. And if you are watching this session on record or replay, please also feel free to get in there and give us some feedback about today's session. So without further ado, Adam, I'll turn things over to you, and you are good to go.
Great. All right, thanks. Looks like my screen's sharing okay.
Yep, you're good to go.
All right, very good. Well, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining. As Dan mentioned, we're going to be talking about Simio data connectors. So I always like to start with a motivating prompt. The business wants to make more data-driven decisions using Simio's data connectors to build more dynamic integrated models. So what is a data connector? In simple terms, it's a bridge to a data source for importing data to the model or exporting to a particular location. So maybe typically we're incorporating some type of process or enterprise data. I'll give a lot of examples as we go throughout that may live in flat files, may live in a database, may live on some cloud system. And we're integrating process data to help build the model. So we talk a lot about data-driven modeling. We have a lot of good sessions on that. And really the value is that allows you to build models faster and maintain them easier. And it's definitely a paradigm shift if you've been using Simio for a long time. You can build models very well by drag and drop and putting information on the objects themselves, but especially over the past few years, we've really emphasized this idea of data-driven modeling. And the data connectors are a key aspect of that. And we're going to see demonstrations of how to use most of these here today. But why is this important? So we see that a lot of businesses are on this digital transformation journey, maybe investing in new systems, collecting more data, and our solution is ready to meet you at any point on this continuum. So you may start by building some simulations, just getting your arms around the process. And there may be some process standardization that's part of this. Having the model can also show you where there may be gaps in the data or opportunities to collect more data as you start running that model and doing some validation, comparing the results to the actual performance of the system. Ultimately, we can use that model still. So I want to really emphasize this offline aspect. So on this side, you're typically incorporating historical data or snapshots of some time and data to model your system. Typically from a design perspective, are there bottlenecks? What if we want to invest in new equipment? What if we want to cross-train some labor? So the system design is really the focus on this offline side. But as you advance on the data maturity curve, you can bring that model online by hooking it in to source systems. And that enables operational use cases where now you're running that model maybe once a week, maybe once a day, maybe several times a day because it's plugged in and it's able to ingest the current status of the system from data sources. And there's a whole suite of use cases and good things that are unlocked on this side, as well as on the left-hand side. But the focus for today will be how do we implement data connectors in our model. And just to add some color to this, here's an example of systems that you may connect to. So obviously flat files, a lot of process data out there lives in Excel spreadsheets. We have things like ERP systems where we may include order information, bill of materials, routing, maybe MES systems, manufacturing execution system, or WMS systems in a warehouse environment where you're bringing in current inventory, current work in process, current status of equipment. Again, if you're running that model, perhaps day to day. Historical data may live in a database, a data warehouse, and in some cases, we also integrate with robotics in more of an orchestration mode. So understanding where they are currently, running some analysis in the digital twin, and then sending information back. So we can be prescriptive to robotics or other technology. We can keep systems of record and databases. We can update order information in the ERP, and so on and so forth. So let's get tactical. What are we going to talk about today? We'll start with what is a data connector, what are the different types, how do we use them, and what are some common applications? And then some of the extras, so configurations, binding options, maybe these are things you've seen, maybe you've used them. We'll cover them today, along with some new features. We'll talk about export bindings as well, not just import. All right. Just confirm, perhaps with Dan, that you can now see the software.
Yes, sir. You're switched over.
All right, terrific. So the canvas for us today will be the scheduling discrete part production example model. This is available to you in the software from the support ribbon examples. I've made a few modifications, but generally if you were to go open this example model, you would see that it's populated with data. This actually comes from a template that we provide you, ISA 95. That's sort of an ERP schema standard for discrete manufacturing. And we're going to work with a number of these tables as we introduce some data connectors. But just to get things started, you'll see I have 25 orders defined in an orders table, such that when I go back to the model and run, I see 25 orders in the queue, and they're processed through 4 departments. So we have a cut department, weld, shape, and finish. It's a really simple model, but again, the focus today isn't too much on modeling, but we're really going to focus on the data connectors. So switching back over, a lot of our work will be done here in the content ribbon of the data tab. You also have a schema ribbon, which is where I can add columns and sort of manipulate the table itself, or add tables, or add an output table. We're going to spend most of our time here in the content ribbon. And you'll see with this create binding button, I get a drop down that illustrates the suite of data connectors that are available. And if you don't have the absolute latest software, you may see some new things here. We're constantly working on this and adding new things to the software. I'll talk about them a little bit at the end, some more cloud storage connection options. But we're going to start with a CSV data connector. And there's 2 ways to create them. The first way is here from the content ribbon. So I'm in create binding CSV data importer. And naturally, right away, it asks me a few questions. So first off, what's the import folder? Just a folder here on my device. You can browse with the 3 dots if you'd like. I have that on my clipboard, so we're ready to go. And one more step here as well. With a CSV importer, you need to select file name as well as sort of a separate step. And you can do that if you click in the white space. These are the properties of the table, so you can do that here in the properties window. And you'll see the drop down is smart and identifies all CSVs that exist in that folder. So that gives me a little confidence right away that I've found this folder, so I've got the right path. You can see here across the top bar as well. Also that the data has not yet been imported or is of unknown age. Okay. Now we have a dedicated data connectors view, where in this case you can see the connection that I've established. So it's a CSV importer. I give a folder, destination, and for a table that I've applied that to, I select a file name. Now I want to show you also, if I create one from here, we'll just borrow our folder, give the import folder. On the drop down, I don't see anything because I haven't applied that importer to a table. So we'll go back to our orders table. Also under the create binding button, we have apply existing binding. And I can have more than one binding on a table. But now that I've applied that second, I have this option to specify the file name as well, which we saw before. I can also do in the properties window from the table view. So you'll see between these 2 views, if you're on the table, you're in the data connectors view, there's some redundancy on purpose to give you just different options to do certain things depending on where you are in the interface. Okay, great. And I can also remove that binding if I want with the remove binding button, put it back on. If I put it back on, I need to grab the file name again. Next, we will take a look at the binding options. So we're going to start with manual. We'll look at automatic a bit later. So the idea with a manual binding option is that I am going to click a button to import this data. So probably a good fit for data that doesn't change too often. So you have the bridge, but it's not pooling data automatically. You're manually going to click the button to import data. So when I do that, you can see now I have a larger set of orders. My message here indicates that last import was quite recently. And now, in the spirit of data-driven modeling, when we run, I have 35 orders brought into the model. Great. So we're off to the races. We've created one import binding. Now we'll take a look at another. So tee this up. I'm going to pull open a spreadsheet where I have two tables. So now this is an XLSX. I have routings data and bill of materials data contained in this spreadsheet. So we'll get to see another type of binding. We're going to use the Excel data importer now. And one small detail is that now I'm asked for the file name. So I'm going to provide a full path, including the file name itself. So just a slight difference that with CSV, I'm asked for the folder, and then I specify the file name separately. With Excel, you provide the full path to the file itself. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply that binding as well to my bill of materials table and go back to the data connectors view and see, similar to CSV, there's one extra step. I found that sometimes if you have that file open, these drop downs register a little bit better. So as you're working with the file through an importer, probably a good practice to close that file out on your machine. But now I'm telling this connector that I have a worksheet for routings and a worksheet for bill of materials that will map to each of the tables that I've applied this binding to. So now I have one importer applied to multiple tables. So I could follow the same step and go back to my tables view, and on each table I can manually click import table, but we have a nice option here for import all matching binding. This will import all tables where the selected connector is the active binding. We'll go ahead and do that. I get a little message box that says we've imported two tables, routings and bill of materials, and now I again see that last import was less than a minute ago. I'm going to show you just a small sort of prove it, and also another nice new feature. We have this clear tables button where I can clear an individual table, I can clear all tables, or similar to the import option, clear all tables with active binding. So now I've removed the data from those two tables with the active binding. And similar to the data connectors view, I have a button here as well for import all for active binding. So we bring that data back in. All right, hopefully so far so good. We're starting off kind of slow, but we're about to ramp it up a little bit. We're going to talk about the database connector next. So go ahead and create a database data importer. Now the question that I'm asked is a little bit different here. So I'm asked for a connection string. And I do not claim to be an expert of all things database. To be quite honest, now that we have tools like ChatGPT, if you were to ask, hey, can you help me build a connection string for a certain authentication type, you could probably get pretty far there. There's also some good notes in the help doc. So I'm in the data connectors help topic, scroll down a bit, you'll see some footnotes on connection string. And I'll explain just in brief what I've passed when we go back and take a look in the data connectors view. So first I'm pointing to the server, which is just my local SQL. database name, trusted connection equals true, is it's going to use my Windows, we're going to use Windows authentication. Basically give me permission here to access that database. You could also use explicit credentials if you wanted to. So some different options there for how you connect. But also pull up SQL Server Management Studio just to show that I do have a database called discrete part demo stored there within the database. So that's step one. Step two, now I have applied this to a table when I created it. I need to specify data object. Let's flip back and take a look. So this is my resources table. I have 3 different resource files there in my database. We can view them and take a look on this side. So we'll start with resources 2, just to use a different layout. So again, we can sort of have a visual aid for the import. So first, I'm going to hard type resources 2. And when I'm doing things that are either auto creating, I like to bring the data tab over on the side. So now we'll go back to our resources table and see I'm bound. And I want to just confirm that I still have my connection string. Yep, everything looks good. So now I import, and this happens to be an auto create table, so I actually see a different layout. Model still up and running, good to go. So now we've created a bridge between the model and the database, and there's a handful of other things I want to show you here. First, we'll just go back and mention that there's a few additional options for a database importer. So you have the option to actually provide a SQL statement here or stored procedure. So these can be used for, typically for kind of cleaning or querying the data in some way. So maybe you have a ton of data in this database and you want to do some manipulation or query that data as part of the import. Something like a stored procedure could be great for error checking or checking for null values and excluding them from the import. Just to name a few things that we've applied before on projects with those options. Now, I think this part's pretty cool. We're going to go back to our resources table and actually select, the automatic binding option. So we already have that. Now let's switch to another layout. So I had 3 there in the database, and I'm not going to hit import or do anything, right? I'm just going to run the model, and we're seeing the impact of that automatic binding option. So if we go back, and I love sort of the tooltips that are provided, it'll tell us in plain terms, in addition to importing the table's data, when the user presses the import button, Simio will automatically import at the start of every run. You can see just by pressing the play button, I actually do the data refresh, and in this case, actually create a new layout because we're using auto create data. So definitely warrants a little bit more discussion. Why would you have an automatic versus a manual binding? So I mentioned with the manual binding, maybe it's relatively static data like a bill of materials that doesn't change that much. The automatic binding is definitely an enabler for more of that online use case that we talked about, or more of an operational model. So maybe you're working in a manufacturing environment and you have sales order information that's being updated frequently, or you always want to be plugged into your current working process. So those would be some examples of why you might have the automatic binding option. And remember as well that that's a per table setting. Table with a binding applied, that's a per table setting. So some tables might have the manual option, while other tables use the automatic option. Okay, great. I want to show you another really nifty feature. And I would bet this is something you haven't seen before, but if you have, please tell me I'm wrong. So it's called token replacement. I'm not going to go too far in the weeds of the jargon, but I'll explain to you what we're doing. I always like to borrow the syntax with the curly brackets and the $sign just straight from the help doc. It's in that same help topic for data connectors we were looking at before. Let me just get this hooked up, and then we'll talk about what we're doing. switch this out to be layout name. Okay. Now, what you'll see is I have a simple model property, and some of my Simio colleagues might be frustrated with me in the background. We say that you shouldn't be editing the model while it's running. That's one of the first things I learned in Simio training. So I'm breaking that rule. So get in the habit of stopping the model before we start messing with things. Good reminder for myself. So all I've done is define a string property called layout name. Why do we define a property? Because now I have, you can think of as sort of this global variable where the user can easily give some information. This token replacement is going to take whatever I give here and sort of port it in to where I put that token replacement. And you should be able to confirm it. So as I change that property now, my data connector message actually updates. Now, why is that important? So now, without even having to go in and configure the data connector, I've exposed a property where the user can pass different file names. Now, there's a lot of applications for this. Maybe you've built a tool for some internal customer who's not, a modeling expert, but they want to pass some different data periodically through your model. So one example might be in a lab setting. If you have, a handful of lab technicians who are using the model you built, and they want to put in different demand profiles or different order sets and run some scenarios that are data-driven scenarios. This would be a great way to do that. And I don't want to steal too much of Kiara's thunder, because she is going to go into this, and our next solution series is going to be focused on data-driven experimentation. But like any other property, that allows me to go experiment with this. And when I run scenarios, just keep in mind that that automatic binding option is really the facilitator. So when I run 4 scenarios in parallel with different file names, you'll actually see a message there that says, for this scenario, I'm importing the data. Right when I hit run, just as I hit run in the experiment, that automatic binding option comes through. All right.
I think you might have just answered this, but someone was typing in as you were talking. How do you make the data import occur automatically?
Yeah, great question. So per table with active binding, I have this binding option of automatic or manual. Manual means I have to press the button. Automatic will occur every time the model is run automatically. So if we go to another one of my bound tables still on the spreadsheet, they say, now I haven't imported in 9 minutes because there's that manual option. So the manual binding option does not pull it when I hit play, and we can see the evidence here. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, carry on. Brilliant. So I want to show you another feature here. So let's do this. Let's actually, we spent a lot of time on the nuts and bolts. Let's actually run this model. I'm going to redock the data tab, and we'll just go ahead and take the model for a spin, see what we get. So I've now run 35 orders through the system, flip over to results, and I can see that 4 of my orders are actually expected to be late. 4, instead of 4, 5. So 5 orders are expected late in this base case. If you haven't navigated discrete part production before, it's also a good example of dashboards. Just while we're here, I'll mention it. You have some nice interactive dashboards on materials, stock levels, more of a traditional dispatch list for the workers and the equipment. And if you're interested, I get excited about dashboards. I like data viz. If you're interested in building these into your models, we have some good trainings, but you could also see in the dashboard designer how those are configured to work with your output data. I basically bring in a chart item and map some output data source like a log or an output table to that dashboard, but I digress. Right now, we have a problem with 5 orders running late. So I'm going to show you another option here, back on data connectors. So my orders table is still bound with the CSV importer 1. So we're going to introduce this concept of configurations. So I can add a second configuration. I'm going to call this 30 orders. We'll imagine maybe we're a little strapped for time, so we just want to quickly generate sort of a conservative scenario, right? We saw 5 orders for late. Let's take 5 orders out and see what we get. So the key point here, or one key point, is that each configuration can have a different file. And I can adjust the configuration here. Now I'll also see it on my data connector message here near the top of the table. So this is in some sense similar to what we did with the token replacement. This also allows you to experiment with those different configurations. So really what workflows best just depends on what you're trying to do there. But let's just make sure, all right, I'm on the 30 orders configuration. Go ahead back and import and see now I have just 30 orders. And we can return, try again. Replan, take a look at our production profile, and we can also see now I am able to get everything done on time. So sort of a trivial example of those configurations, I guess not entirely trivial, but one concrete application of these is maybe you have a dev or development set of data that goes across several tables. So in this model already, we have 7 or 8 tables. Not uncommon to have a dozen or 2 dozen data tables in your model. So maybe you have a dev data set, but maybe then you have a production data set that you're actually using in sort of that real-time way. That would be a really good application of those configurations. So you can easily flip between dev and production, depending on who's running the model. So if you're running it as the architect, you may be in dev. If an end user is running it, they may be in production. You can do the same thing, note, for a database connector as well, or any of the other connectors. All right, very good. We've talked about configurations. Now I want to show you another setting because we're growing here in complexity. I have multiple bindings, I have multiple tables, I have some tables on multiple bindings. So I want to show you an option that comes in handy. Similar to that idea of configurations, you may have multiple bindings on a particular table. So maybe in some cases you're pulling from flat files, other cases you want to pull from the database. So if I have multiple bindings applied to a table, I have this change all bindings option. So if I wanted to flip everything over to use the Excel importer, it tells me it's available on 3 of my 9 tables, I can do that in one fell swoop here. So as you grow in this, it's a great shortcut, so you don't have to click into each table and switch it over one at a time. I've used this myself on projects, definitely comes in handy. And as we saw before, if I want to remove that binding, I can do that here. All right, very good. Next, we'll talk more downstream. We'll talk about results and exporting data. What does that look like? So any table, I have this save to CSV option. If I wanted to simply take this down and save it to CSV, I can do that manually. But we also have this concept of an export binding. So let's talk about why you might apply that and where it's relevant. So output table is a table made up of state columns. So if you've been working in Simio, you may know the difference between properties and states. So we'll just do a quick spiel on these. So properties and states are both strongly typed variables, essentially. So I can have a string. These are kind of some bad examples. But I can have a real, I can have a Boolean. But the key with the property is it gets a value at the beginning of the run and then it doesn't change. So my model properties here on the right, you'll see while the model is running, I can't click in and change them. State variables, on the other hand, are assignable. They're also strongly typed, but they're assignable while the model's running. So in tables, it works the same way. These input tables, I've created property columns that get a value at the beginning of the run and don't change. In my output tables, I have state columns, and then I can use assign steps essentially to and add rows. So I can add rows to this table dynamically and assign data while the model's running. An awesome, really powerful feature for creating a sandbox of data that you want to use for decisioning while the model is running. Also a great place to create a custom tabular report that you want to use ultimately for analysis for decision support. So here I have manufacturing orders output. Essentially chronicles the journey of each order through its steps in the manufacturing process. I think 3 was maybe a whip order. Let's take a look at another one. So I can see this particular good went cut, weld, finish with these start and end times. So we're going to do now, either for post-processing or keeping this information in a system of record, we're going to apply an export binding to a database. So I'm going to ignore this prompt here and actually just go over to data connectors because I want to borrow my connection string. So we're going to use the same connection string, same database. And now I need to provide a destination table name. So where's this data going? So let's look back at SQL, see that I have a manufacturing orders output table in my database. Easy enough. So I'll pass that here. And another thing to just call out is that you have different export types, pretty standard if you've worked with databases. So what do you want to do? For instance, if there's some data there, do you want to create the table? Do you want to truncate and repopulate? So some different options there as to how the data actually ships out. And I want to just confirm before I keep talking. Dan, can you still hear me okay? I got a chime in my
Yeah, you're good. And there are a few questions out here, so people that are asking questions, just so you're aware, we are receiving them. I didn't want to interrupt Adam's flow.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm getting pretty close to wrapping, so I would agree. Let's keep questions. Let's keep the questions on hold for now. So I'm going to go with truncate and repopulate. I have the connection string. I've given the destination table name, and now we have to talk about the export options. So just as I have import binding options, I have different export options and a lot of flexibility here. End of plan run, end of experiment replication run. So if you want to push some data out for every replication experiment, could be a lot of data, but you have that option. And I've seen some great use cases for that as well. And I want to just call out that you can apply this. So where does export binding apply? You can do it on an output table. You can also do it on a log. So if you have logs, you can see the same set of options there as well on the log. So we're going to go with export at end of plan run. So we'll bump back over to the planning tab, create plan, give that a minute. Didn't have an error message or anything, but we ought to confirm that our data did in fact export. So I do a couple refreshes there. Now we'll take a look at this table in SQL and just confirm, all right, I have 84 rows here, so I got it out. And back in Simio, I also have 84 rows that were sent out. So definitely some good workflows there. Maybe your business has a practice of using Tableau or Power BI. Personally, I'm biased and I really like Simio dashboards, but as we mentioned on the slides, there's a lot of reasons you might want to send data out. So the export bindings are a great way to establish those connections and actually automate the flow of data out of the model. It's typically critical for more of an operational use case where you need to send task lists or send something back out every time you perhaps publish a plan. That's another option is when you publish a plan. So you're doing experimentation and comparison here in the interface, and when you publish, that's when you want to actually push the data out. I think that is enough said on export binding. And finally, my last topic is going to be just an overview of some of the additional brand new connectors that we've built in. So see, we now have connector options for Amazon S3, Azure Blob. We also have file stores to help sort of structurally manage those connections to cloud systems. We also have a web API importer that can pull from an API endpoint. So if you take a look, you essentially have to authenticate. So typically you provide a URL and some sort of authentication method. So when you make that call, your access to it is verified, it's confirmed. through the authentication tab. Now, why might you go that route? So first and foremost is integrating with existing infrastructure. Many organizations already store critical business data in the cloud or make it available through APIs. So by connecting to these for your simulation efforts, you aren't duplicating data or duplicating your efforts. Also very scalable and flexible to store data in the cloud. So this can enable your simulations to handle large scale data without the need for local storage. And also possibly more real time. So a lot of these enterprise systems, can interface with cloud storage in near real time. And we have features to enable you to do that for your simulation as well. Well, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was informative. And my last note here is that if you like what you heard, you're interested in learning more, let's collaborate, reach out to your account manager or connect with us for more discussion. We'd love to hear from you. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Adam. All right, so the questions that have rolled in, we have about 6 or 7 in the queue here, 5 or 6 in the queue. We should be able to get through all of the questions that came in. First off is a question about Simio Portal. And for those of you out there that may not be aware of what Simio Portal is an internally hosted web application that has a different user interface or a graphical user interface intended for the non-Simio user that can run scenarios, experiments, schedules, etc. So if you are not aware of what Portal is, the following question is about Portal. That's what it is. Adam, the question is, can we import data using Portal? Could the end user pass data into Portal and run the model with that?
Yeah, great question. So in simplest terms, right, all of these data connectors that I defined have scope of what I'm trying to connect to. So CSV importer, why does this work? Because I have a C drive on my computer where I'm running Simio. These folders exist on my local device in my C drive. Now, if I sent this model to you, this is a great question because can definitely create some pitfalls. If I sent this model to my friend, they would have to come in and change the file path to something that makes sense on their device, right? They don't have the same file structure on their device. Same applies to Simio Portal. So Simio Portal is almost always installed on a virtual machine. So if you want to run data through your model on Portal, you need to ensure that Portal is able to see the data source that you put in your data connector. And there's sort of 2 main methods. So when we install Portal, there is a SQL database on that machine to store results, user information, basically for storage of Portal and what's on Portal. However, you could also run data through that same database. And you get the connection string, it would work because that database is on the Portal machine. Now it's a little tricky because I'm sitting here on my computer. I can access one of our portals hosted in the office because I'm on network. But if I upload a model there with this data connector, I'm going to get an error on Portal. Portal, where the model is actually running, is like, I don't know about Adam Sneath's C drive. Now there are 2 main techniques. The one is use a database that's sitting perhaps on that Portal machine and that maybe I've also been given remote access to. So I can do it here on my desktop. I can put the model on Portal and it works there too. Another similar approach is kind of a folder-based file share. A third option would be some of these cloud connectors. But the file share concept is, you have maybe someone from IT or go onto that machine, create a folder and share it with your account. And I have, it's like a network folder. And then the path is a little bit different. It's called a UNC path. So to shorten my answer, yes, you can. And if you're interested in some examples, reach out. We could have that discussion. You got to make sure Portal can see the data source that you specified in your connector before you put the model up there.
Okay, great. And as I had mentioned earlier, if you didn't jot my email or Adam's email down at the beginning of this session, I will flash that up one more time here before we end. So as Adam's offering to reach out, you'll see contact information for both of us. All right, Adam, next question. regarding size limits. Are there any size limits to data tables that Simio can import? Could it hypothetically import an Excel sheet with 1 million rows?
I'm very proud of the answer to this question because the answer is technically no, there are no limits. So I think Excel does cut you off at 1 million rows. I have imported a file to a model with 1,800,000 rows. Now, when you get data that large, you may want to check out kind of the memory on your device. If you can get 32, 64 gigs of RAM versus 8 or 16, might help you with model performance. But depends on how you're using that data in the model too. So you'd almost definitely want to take advantage of primary foreign key relationships if you need to sort through that data. So if you're using search steps or something to access that, you don't want to search 1 million rows really at any point in the run, especially if you're doing that repeatedly. So when you use primary and foreign keys, you can essentially pare down your search. So here's an example. I have 13 rows of routings data, but because of the primary foreign key, if I have a row reference for good A, I only sort of see 5 rows in that data instead of all 13. And when I search, I only search those 5. So it can make your searching and model performance more efficient. So no limits, but some good practices as to how to keep your model running fast if you have big data.
Great, thanks, Adam. Next question, what is the difference between development and production view in model runs?
Yeah, so I mean, these are fairly general terms. I think that can refer to kind of a software development environment or sort of a go live or an analysis mode. We focus on a manufacturing setting. So your dev workspace is where you're making changes and you're testing things. So maybe you're going into the data and manually changing some things that aren't true to the real system. So again, we're working with a lot of process data. So maybe you're putting in fake orders or alternative bills and materials to test and develop your model, but you don't want to change the real data because that's your source of truth. So the production mode or environment is really the source of truth that's going to be pulling from your actual environment. Good question.
All right. The questions are still rolling in, so please keep typing them in, and I'll keep asking them as long as we have time. Next question: with Excel bindings, do you suggest having all the tables in the same Excel document, but different sheets, or have different Excel files per table?
Yeah, I like the idea of having one workbook with different sheets, one sheet per Simio table. That can be a really friendly way to work for analysts or your colleagues, everybody's really comfortable with Excel. So maybe you have 3 sheets in that workbook and the user is going to go in and change some data in Excel or update some data in Excel, and then the model's bound, so it's automatically going to pull in those 3 tables after the user updates them in Excel and saves. So I would typically go the route of multiple sheets in one workbook. I think that could be a good approach.
All right. This question just popped in, so I'll read it because it's very, very straightforward. Can you import data while the model is running?
This is an interesting question. So yes, and here's an example of why you might want to do that. So let's say you have some complex part of the manufacturing process where you want to maybe run an optimization. So maybe you're sampling from a lot of different batches and you need to get a certain concentration. So in November, if you tune in, Jeff is going to talk about sort of optimization concepts. And I would definitely recommend attending that session. I certainly will, because it's very interesting. But to get to the point, we've had projects where you run the model to a certain point, and maybe once a day you want to send some data out, run a solver in Python or something on the data from the simulation. So at a certain point, send out, what are the contents of my batches, run a solver, and then send something back in. So you tell the model how to sample or how to mix. So you can do that again, if you're interested in this or you have an application, I would reach out because we do lean on some of our user-defined steps. These are out there on our GitHub that you can read or write rows to a database. I call it in process, typically using process logic. Yeah, that can be pretty neat if the application is right, but you can.
Great. All right, let's get 2 more questions in, then I'll get my screen back up, and so everyone has the email addresses in case we did not get to your question. Can you bind a model property value to a specific value in your data file, such as a certain cell in your table?
Yeah, certainly can. So let's see if we can find a good example. If I wanted to experiment with order quantity, I can go define a real property and say, order 10 quantity. Now, in this case, if you were adjusting order quantities, you may want to do that, but maybe you have one really big order, so you're just focused on one in particular. You can right-click that cell and map to a property of the same type. Maybe you have some true or false attributes in the data, and then you can go ahead and experiment with that. So absolutely yes, and no problem to do that.
All right, last question. Can we define an automatic export for the output data? So like with an automatic import, when starting the run, we can automatically export data when we pause or stop the model run. That was a mouthful. Does that make sense?
Sure did. Yeah,
Okay.
certainly can. Certainly can. So I would recommend exploring those export options. We actually did that. So just with the import, you have a manual, click the button to send it out. But if you apply, these export options do essentially automate that. So at end of plan run, it goes out automatically, or at end of experiment replication run, or when I save the model. So yes, you certainly can. And these options allow you to do that.
All right, great. Thanks, Adam. And we're coming up close to time here, so let me just grab control back one more time, flash the email addresses up there, and we will finish up. All right, so there's our email addresses, just in case you did not get your question answered, or as Adam suggested or recommended, if he answered your question but you want to detail it further or talk further about it, feel free to reach out to one of us. If you reach out to me, I'll get in touch with Adam. If you reach out to Adam, he'll probably respond to your question directly, but you can always reach out to both of us just to ensure that we get the question that comes in. Oh, hold on, one more question came in. Let's see if we can get it in. How do you maximize CPU, GPU utilization when running a model experiment to reduce runtime? Is that something you can answer quickly, Adam?
I think so. Yeah, take a look at the task manager, see if anything's strained. You can, in some cases, distribute runs to other devices. So we have what's called a replication runner in the experiment. Portal's also a great avenue for that. Really, I would say is the preferred avenue, because you can typically provision a VM with more virtual CPUs, just leverage the power of cloud compute. If you go to our website and look at our solutions offerings, you'll see some more footnotes about kind of the power of cloud computing. So if you wanted to run really big experiments, I'd probably go down the Portal route. It's typically easier to kind of meander with a VM and add memory or add virtual cores than it is a physical device, although you can do that as well. So yeah, take a look at your task manager, the runtime profiling feature in the model. You can kind of see what's computationally intense as you have bigger data and bigger models.
Perfect. All right, well, that looks like the end of our questions that came in. If we didn't answer your questions, once again, there's the email addresses on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us. Otherwise, we thank everyone for attending. Next session is October the 17th, just to remind you. So a little over a month from now. We hope to see everyone then. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Take care.